these tactics are used by the enemy against great giants of God. And the story comes from 2 Samuel chapter 16, if you'd like to turn there with me. 2 Samuel chapter 16. Let me give you a little bit of a background. This is about David, King David. And if you remember, David was anointed as king many years before he actually began to reign as king. He was anointed as king, but Saul was still on the throne. And Saul began this battle, basically, to actually killed David. David had the opportunity to win that battle several times, but he didn't take it because he felt like it was a spiritual battle and that it was God's decision as to when he would remove Saul from the throne and place David on that throne. Well, eventually he did that, and David came from within his own home. You may remember that David had a very best friend, and that was Jonathan, the son of Saul. And he was killed when David finally became a king of Israel. But Jonathan had a little boy, the only surviving member of the family or the clan of Saul. And so his name was Mephibosheth, and he was crippled. And he was hidden because in that time when a new king took over, they just pretty much annihilated the family of anybody who might be able to claim the throne. And so they had fear that he would do that, that David would do that, and so they hid Jonathan's son from him. But that was not Jonathan's or David's intention at all. David, in fact, sought him out and brought him to live in the palace and to eat at the king's table and to become part of the family. I don't think that set very well with some of David's own sons, his legitimate sons, because they felt that this intruder was sort of a threat to the throne. Well, one of David's sons was quite good looking, and his name was Absalom. You may have remember him, may have read about him. And Absalom did something that was not a real good thing to do, but he thought it was the proper thing to do. You see, he would sit at the gate of the city of Jerusalem. And when people would come to Jerusalem with a complaint or a problem or a difficulty or something that they needed to see the king about, the first person they would meet would be Absalom at the gate of the city. And Absalom would ask them what was going on. And if there was any way he would try to solve the problem before it ever got to David. Now that's kind of a good thing, except that the reason he was doing it was so that he could gain the favor of the people of Israel and eventually take over the throne. And in fact, that's what he did. At one particular point, he overthrows David and takes over the palace, and David has to flee for his life and take the few remaining people that are loyal to him with him out of the city, and they're fleeing from Absalom. And this is where chapter 16 takes up. In 2 Samuel chapter 16, we begin the story. And so I'd like for us to begin reading the first 4 verses of this chapter. 2 Samuel chapter 16, verse 4. It says, when David had gone a short distance beyond the summit, remember he's fleeing for his life out of Jerusalem, there was Ziba, the steward of Mephibosheth, waiting to meet him. And he had a string of donkeys saddled and loaded with 200 loaves of bread, 100 cakes of raisins, 100 cakes of figs, and a skin of wine. And the king asked Ziba, why have you brought these? And Ziba answered, the donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, the bread and fruit are for the men to eat, and the wine is to refresh those who become exhausted in the wilderness. And the king then asked, where is your master's grandson? He's talking about Mephibosheth. And Ziba said to him, he's staying in Jerusalem because he thinks today the Israelites will restore to me my grandfather's kingdom. Then the king said to Ziba, all that belonged to Mephibosheth is now yours. I humbly bow, Ziba said. May I find favor in your eyes, my lord, the king. Basically, here's what happened. David is fleeing the city, and Ziba, who is the servant to Mephibosheth, comes and brings all this food and these donkeys and things to help the king as he's leaving. And David asks, well, where's Mephibosheth? And he says, well, he didn't want to come because he thinks now that you're leaving the city, he's going to become king. It's a lie. It's not true. That is not at all what Mephibosheth thought or did, but this is actually Ziba trying to deceive King David. And that's the very first weapon that Satan uses against us, is deception. Satan is the father of all lies. He is the father of lies. He loves to lie, and he will lie every time he opens his mouth. Satan is a liar. And he deceives us as he tries to defeat us before God. And now you may say, well, he can't deceive me because I'm a Christian and I have the Holy Spirit. Well, I hope and pray that that's true. But he still tries to